In the oppressive heat of a Chicago summer, the Vieira estate serves as a gilded cage for its newest occupant. Contained within its opulent walls, a woman of just 22 perspires in her wedding finery. Her matrimonial celebration has soured into a moment of dreadful clarity as the tenor of a consequential discussion emanates from a nearby study.
In the cold marble corridor of a lavish estate, a 22-year-old bride stands frozen in silence as she hears the man waiting at the altar confess that he never wanted her. Her white gown rustles like a ghost against the walls, and every word from behind that study door cuts deeper than a blade. On the other side, the Mafia king speaks of marriage not as devotion but as acquisition. And in that single moment before the ceremony even begins, a tragedy is already set into motion, one written not in vows but in pride, fear, and heartbreak.
The eavesdropping was entirely unintentional, a consequence of being lost within the labyrinthine mansion that was to be her prison. Then the voice of Elio, her husband-to-be, stops her cold. "I do not want her. I never did." The words land not as sound, but as a physical impact, forcing her back against the cool marble wall. Her elaborate hairstyle now feels like a block of cement, the veil a symbol of pure mockery. So, why do it, boss? This, from Bruno, Elio's second-in-command, is the essential question. The answer reveals the cold logic of their enterprise. Because her father controls the South Side distribution, a simple, brutal transaction. Unseen, she can nonetheless perfectly conjure Elio's image. He is 37, with features that seem carved from granite. His impassive gray eyes had fallen upon her perhaps twice, each time with the detached appraisal one gives a column in a financial statement. The Centauro crew is moving in, Elio's voice clarifies. Marrying Geneva locks down our power, takes out a rival, and secures her father's ports. It was only 6 months ago that her own father, Vittorio Moretti, had dismissed her ambitions to study art in Florence as utterly without merit. He had declared her aspirations for a normal existence to be inconsequential. The Vieira family required an agreement, and she was the currency. "She's pretty enough," interjects Dario, Elio's cousin, whose gaze always felt predatory. "Good breeding stock." The objectification is absolute. She bites her lip until she tastes blood, suppressing the instinct to confront them for reducing her to a mere instrument of procreation. But she was raised within this brutal code. She understands its tenets. Women are to remain silent, ornamental, and functional, ensuring the lineage survives. "Pretty isn't what I need," Elio counters, his voice edged with acrimony. "I need someone I can trust who gets this life, not some sheltered girl who thinks this is a romance novel." The profound irony is his assumption of her naivete. This is a woman who witnessed her own mother be consumed by this exact life. She saw how it hollows out its women, leaving them as beautiful, vacant effigies. She had spent her life architecting an escape, only to be traded to a man even more intimidating than her father. "So what's the plan for after?" Bruno inquires. "She gets the East Wing," Elio dictates with disinterest. "As long as she stays out of my business and pops out an heir within a year, she can redecorate the whole place for all I care." It is this final dismissal that triggers a fracture deep within her. It was not her heart that broke. She harbored no such romantic illusions. It was her pride, the last vestige of self that yearned for a basic measure of dignity. "You're a cold bastard, Elio," Dario laughs. "At least fake it on the wedding night." Elio's reply is clinical. "I'll do my duty." A flat, empty, and final decree. She does not wait to hear more. She gathers her gown and flees, the sound of her heels in the hallway like sporadic gunfire. Her vision blurs, but she will not weep here. Finding an empty powder room, she secures the lock and grips the sink, confronting her own reflection. The face in the mirror is that of a stranger. The makeup is a perfect mask, but her characteristically vibrant eyes are now dull. Her lips are a dark, sanguine red. A bride, a pawn, a mechanism for an alliance. Her phone vibrates on the countertop. It is a message from Lena, her closest confidant, the only other person who comprehends this inherited burden. The text asks, 10 minutes till showtime. You ready? Ready? The word is a cruel joke. Ready to be fettered to a man who views her as a strategic asset? She types a shaky reply, need 5 more minutes. The truth is, she requires a lifetime. She needs to be on a different continent, wearing anything but this dress, about to bind herself to a man who just extinguished her final ember of hope. A sharp knock on the door makes her flinch. Geneva. It is her father, his voice laced with annoyance. What is taking you so long? The ceremony kicks off in 5 minutes. After composing her appearance, she opened the door. Victoria Moretti stood there, his tuxedo straining to contain his broad chest, his face florid from fine wine and a history of poor choices. You're looking pasty, he commented, his focus sharpening. Are you feeling sick? Just nervous, she lied. There was no purpose in telling him she had learned of her future husband's profound contempt for her. Her father's currency was not happiness, but the alliance, the power, and the territory this marriage solidified. You have nothing to be nervous about. He offers his arm, and she takes it without choice. Elio Vieira is a powerful man. You're lucky to be marrying him. Lucky? The word feels like ash in her mouth. As they proceed toward the chapel of 200 guests, she sees a tableau of her future, armed sentinels at every vantage point. Servers dispense champagne that costs more than a house. Women are encumbered with diamonds and artificial smiles. Men broker sordid agreements between toasts, their hands metaphorically stained with things wealth cannot launder. This is her new reality. The chapel doors open. Every guest turns to watch her glide down the aisle. She keeps her spine rigid, her chin elevated, her face a serene blank. Years of grooming for this exact role as a mafioso's wife take hold, even as her spirit screams for her to run. At the altar awaits Elio Vieira, 6 feet and 2 inches of sheer intimidation. His black tuxedo is immaculate, his hair perfectly coiffed, and his face is an unreadable mask as she approaches. His cold gray eyes lock onto hers, and she searches them for any sign that she misheard him. There is none. Only ice. The ceremony becomes a disorienting blur. She hears her own voice reciting vows she does not mean, feels Elio's frigid fingers slide a ring onto hers. She tastes champagne when he kisses her, with the perfunctory passion of finalizing a contract. The guests applaud. A toast is offered. The orchestra plays a cheerful tune. It is all a performance. Through it all, a profound numbness radiates from her chest. The reception unfolds in a grand ballroom of palatial scale. She smiles until her face aches, dances with men whose names she will not recall, and accepts insincere congratulations from women who regard her with a mix of pity and envy. They all comprehend the transaction. They recognize both the price and the prize of securing a man like Elio Vieira. He pays her little mind, moving through the room and conducting business at his own wedding. She is a completed deal, displayed only when a person of importance appears. His touch on her waist is an act of ownership, his smile a cold front that never recedes. My wife, he would say, the word sounding unnatural. Geneva. Not an endearment, just her name, a sterile identifier. Around midnight, Lena finds her on a balcony, observing the city lights. You look miserable, Lena states, placing a glass of superior liquor in her hand. Not the standard fare for guests. I am miserable, she concedes, as there is no value in pretense with Lena. Theirs is a lifelong friendship." "What happened?" her friend asks, perceiving something beyond the obvious horror of the arrangement. Geneva recounts every brutal word she overheard. By the end, Lena is incandescent with rage. "That bastard," she spits. "I should tell my dad to cancel the shipping deal. See how Elio likes losing the Mediterranean routes." "Don't," Geneva implores, seizing her arm. "It will only worsen my situation. He will take the cost of that lost business out on me." "So what? You'll just be his broodmare." The question hangs in the air, damning. What other path is available to her? Divorce is not a concept in their world. Fleeing means a death sentence for her and her family. This is her unalterable reality. "I will endure," she resolves silently, but Lena speaks into her thoughts. "You were made for more than just surviving, Jenny." Lena's voice breaks. "You deserve someone who actually likes you, not this arrangement." But that option does not exist for her. Geneva drains her glass, the burn a welcome distraction. She will accept the terms offered, security and wealth. It must be enough, but she knows this is a lie. It will never be enough. It is simply all she has. The night concluded with Elio and her being led to the master suite by a crowd of rowdy relatives, making lewd jokes about producing an heir. She wore her smile like a suit of armor, allowing their assumptions. Finally, the door clicked shut. For the first time, she was alone with her new husband. Elio went directly to the bar, poured a significant amount of scotch, and drank it in one go. He poured a second, then addressed her. "The guest room's free, if you want," he offered, his voice betraying a hope that she would accept. "Or you can stay. It's up to you." So this was the arrangement. He would fulfill his duty and nothing more. This was the instant she officially became his property, in the only manner men of his world understood. She contemplated walking away, preserving her final shred of dignity in the guest room. But then she recalled his cold words, his perception of her as a mere game piece, a wild, defiant fire ignited within her. "I'm staying," she announced, meeting his gaze. "After all, you need that heir within the year, right?" His eyes narrowed infinitesimally. It was the first authentic emotion she had drawn from him. "You heard that." It was a declaration, not a query. "I heard everything." She turned from him, reaching for the zipper on her dress. "I heard you don't want me, that I'm some clueless girl who knows nothing about your world, that you're just going to do your duty and leave." The zipper caught midway. As she fumbled with it, a hot flush of anger and humiliation rose in her throat. Then he was behind her, gently moving her hands to free the mechanism. His breath was warm on her neck, his presence irradiating heat. "You were not supposed to hear that," he said softly. "But I did." The moment the dress came loose, she stepped away from him, clutching it to her chest. "So let's not kid ourselves. This is a business deal, a strategic move." She walked into the bathroom and locked the door, leaning against it as the tears she held back were finally released. For 3 months, Elio and I perfected the performance of being strangers who shared a last name. He occupied the West Wing. I was relegated to the East. We never dined together, appeared in public solely for business, and communicated with the frigid decorum of first-time acquaintances. Our wedding night unfolded exactly as he had promised, a transaction devoid of intimacy. His manner was clinical and swift, and he had not laid a hand on me since. I convinced myself this was inconsequential. I framed the void he maintained as my preference, not his dismissal. I insisted that a life of galas and galleries was fulfilling. I was engaged in a profound act of self-deception, and I was aware of it. Yet the falsehood was more tolerable than the ache that gripped me whenever I witnessed him command a room with such innate authority. It was easier than conceding that, over the past 90 days, I had begun to catalog the small details about him. The way a scarce smile could entirely reshape his features, the deliberate grace in his hands, the flicker of vulnerability in his eyes when he believed he was unobserved. I was developing feelings for a man who did not want me. A truly pitiable state. September introduced a chill to the Chicago air, and Bruno began to visit my section of the mansion with increasing frequency. Mrs. Vieira, he would invariably greet me, his tone formal despite my requests to be called Geneva. The boss requires your decision on the gala. Or, the boss has permitted you to redecorate the solarium. Or, the boss noted you walking unaccompanied and has increased security. It was always the boss. It was never Elio. It took me a full 2 weeks to grasp the underlying reality of the situation. Elio had placed me under constant surveillance. This extended beyond Bruno's reports to include cameras throughout the estate, guards shadowing my walks, and staff chronicling my every action. Such a revelation should have ignited my fury. Instead, I found a dark humor in it. The man who ostensibly wanted no connection with me was monitoring my life as if I were some invaluable object. Why is he so concerned with my activities? I finally challenged Bruno one afternoon. His expression was a flawless mask of neutrality. The boss considers his responsibilities to be of the utmost importance, ma'am. Is it my welfare that is his responsibility? Or my readiness? The sharp edge of bitterness in my tone was unmistakable. For whenever he requires the air, he is so fixated on producing. A subtle change crossed Bruno's expression. Mrs. Vieira, if I might be candid, I gestured for him to continue. My curiosity piqued. The boss is not a simple man to comprehend, Bruno stated with care. However, he is not the man you perceive him to be. Before I could press for more, my phone vibrated with Lena's reminder of our lunch appointment. The chosen restaurant was on neutral ground, owned by a family unaligned with any major faction. Lena was already seated upon my arrival, her security team stationed at an adjacent table, their gazes methodically scanning the area. You appear drained, she remarked as I took my seat. Are you not sleeping? Hardly. My bed felt immense and vacant, which contradicted the relief I was supposed to feel about Elio's emotional distance. He is maintaining his distance, then. I simply affirmed with a nod, concealing my expression behind the menu. Absolute silence unless his precious wife is required for a photo opportunity. Men are utterly oblivious, Lena complained, flagging down a waiter. Particularly in our world, they equate emotion with weakness. This isn't about emotion, I whispered. He fundamentally does not desire me. He established that with perfect clarity before we were even wed. After the waiter delivered our wine, Lena leaned closer. May I share something I overheard from my father? I agreed, uncertain if I truly wanted to hear it. The Santoro family is making strategic moves, she said softly. They are acquiring officials, paying off police, and solidifying their grip on the north side. My father believes they are preparing for a significant offensive. The Santoros were our adversaries, the very reason for my marriage to Elio. Their territory abutted our own, a fragile truce that had simmered for years without ever erupting into open conflict. What does any of that have to do with me? I inquired, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach. They perceive you as Elio's vulnerability, Lena stated plainly. The one thing he prizes above his own empire. Harming you would be a direct assault on him. That's absurd. He is indifferent to me. Are you certain? Lena arched a brow. My father claims Elio has been obsessed with your security from the very start. He tripled your protection, had new surveillance put in, and he personally vets anyone who comes within 50 feet of you. My earlier exchange with Bruno now assumed a terrifying logic. Your welfare is his responsibility. He's merely safeguarding an asset, I countered. Any harm to his wife would project an image of weakness. Continue telling yourself that, Lena said with a knowing look. Perhaps you should evaluate him based on his actions, not his words. The remainder of our meal was devoted to safer subjects, charity events and Lena's ongoing conflict with her father about another arranged union. As we departed, the afternoon sun cast a warm glow across the Chicago skyline. My driver, Marcus, was waiting beside the vehicle. When we merged into traffic, I registered a black SUV that had not been present moments before. Marcus, I said softly, my heart rate beginning to climb. Is someone following us? His gaze flicked to the rear view mirror, his jaw clenching. Yes, ma'am. Brace yourself. He accelerated with practiced skill, navigating through the flow of cars, but the SUV remained on our tail, expertly matching our every maneuver. My phone was in my hand as it began to ring. Elio's name illuminated the display. What is your location? He asked, his voice sharp with tension. Leaving my lunch, Marcus reports we're being followed. I am aware. We are tracking your position. Do not end this call. His tone carried an emotion I had never heard from him before. It was fear. Elio, just remain on the line, Geneva. The sound of him using my given name, not a cold title, made me hold my breath. Bruno is 2 minutes away with reinforcements. Marcus has his instructions. At that moment, the SUV accelerated, pulling directly alongside us. I saw a darkened window and the reflection of metal being raised. Marcus wrenched the wheel and we swerved into an alley as the sound of gunfire erupted behind us. A scream escaped me as the phone tumbled to the floor, my hands clutching the seat as Marcus drove with frantic speed. Mrs. Vieira, Elia's voice called faintly from the footwell. Geneva! My hands trembled as I retrieved the device. I'm here. I am all right. Where is he taking you? I'm not sure. I searched the passing blur of buildings for any recognizable feature. We are entering the warehouse district. More gunfire erupted, significantly closer now. The rear windshield exploded, showering me with glass. I dropped to the floor, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hold on, ma'am, Marcus grunted. We're almost there. Almost where? The thought vanished when I saw our destination. One of Elia's holdings. The structure was deliberately anonymous, a fortress hiding in plain sight. As we approached, massive gates parted to grant us passage. Marcus accelerated, clearing the threshold as it began to seal shut. The pursuit concluded against the impassable barrier with a sickening crunch as armed figures emerged from the shadows to envelop our car. Then Elio was there, wrenching my door open. His olive complexion was drained to a spectral white, his eyes betraying a profound terror. Are you injured? His hands moved over me in a frantic assessment, shattering his ironclad composure. Did they wound you? Geneva, answer me. I am unharmed. I managed to say. The window shattered, but I'm unharmed, though my severe trembling made the words sound feeble. He pulled me from the vehicle and into his embrace, crushing the air from my lungs. I could feel his heart racing in sync with mine. He was shaking. Thank God, he whispered the words into my hair. When I saw the tracker deviate from its route. He left the sentence unfinished, but it was unnecessary. I understood. For the very first time, Elio Vieira was revealing a fissure in his defenses. This wasn't the ruthless tycoon or the mob leader, but simply a man terrified for my life. The safe house was precisely what one would anticipate from a man like Elio Vieira, a fortress furnished with immense wealth and completely disconnected from the grid. Expansive bulletproof windows offered a view of the Chicago River, illuminating the marble floors as silent sentinels stood guard at every entrance. The security here would rival a government facility. It was yet another opulent cage, similar to his primary residence, but on this occasion the formidable Elio was trapped inside with her. "You will remain here until this threat is neutralized," he stated, pacing like a caged predator, the sleeves of his shirt rolled up his powerful forearms. His hair, usually immaculate, was in disarray from his agitated hands running through it. "Bruno is mobilizing our men. The Santoro family is going to regret this." She simply observed him from the sofa, still trembling. This was not the man she had married. This version of Elio was losing his vaunted composure. "How long?" she asked softly. "As long as necessary." He stopped, his gray eyes fixing on hers. "Days, weeks, until I am 100% certain you are safe." "So I am your captive once more." His jaw tightened. "You are being protected. There is a significant distinction." A dangerous glint appeared in his eyes as he moved to the bar, pouring a scotch for himself and then one for her. He carried the glass to her, pressing it into her hand. "Drink," he ordered. "You can't seem to stop shaking." He was not wrong. Her hands were trembling so violently that the liquor was spilling. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the sickening aftermath of a near-death experience. "They were firing at me," she murmured, "with actual bullets." "I know." Elio sat beside her, closer than he had been since their wedding, near enough that I could detect his cologne and see the muscle twitching in his jaw. "This is my responsibility." She gave him a stunned look. "Your fault." "I should have anticipated this," he said harshly, his hands clenching into fists. "The Santoros have been probing our defenses for months." His admission of guilt, manifest as a desire for control, enhanced security, which she immediately rejects as another form of imprisonment. She asserts her personhood against his possessiveness, a declaration he cannot refute, as his voice cracks under the weight of his own culpability. He offers the title of wife as justification, a word rendered hollow by 3 months of calculated indifference. Her sharp inquiry exposes this hypocrisy, recasting his past behavior as a clear signal that she was never a partner, but merely a strategic component in his grand design. His stunned reaction reveals her words have hit their mark. Fortified by liquid courage, she unveils the source of her pain, a memory from their wedding day. She recounts his conversation with Bruno and Dario, where he defined her not as a bride, but as a trustworthy asset. The blood draining from his face confirms her account. She holds his gaze, her own pain evident, and reframes his present concern as the simple protection of an investment. The accusation strikes a nerve, forcing him to physically retreat from the confrontation, his posture rigid with unspoken turmoil. A prolonged silence hangs between them, broken only by his offer to reveal a deeper motive. The vulnerability in his tone invites her guarded response. When he finally turns to face her, the raw emotion he displays is a shocking departure from his usual composure. The carefully constructed mask of indifference shatters, revealing unfiltered anguish. His confession is a stunning subversion of his powerful image. He was terrified. Not of a rival, but of her. From the very first moment their alliance was proposed, a revelation she can barely comprehend. Moving closer, he explains the source of his fear was the emotion she stirred in him. For 15 years, he had equated caring with weakness, erecting emotional fortifications. She, however, appeared as an unforeseen force, effortlessly bypassing his elaborate defenses. He confesses to an immediate and profound desire for her, one that transcended the physical. He admits to craving an emotional intimacy, to know her thoughts, to hear her laugh, that was utterly incompatible with the cold calculus of their arranged union. She interprets his actions as a preemptive strike designed to assert dominance. He reframes it not as aggression, but as self-preservation, a defense mechanism that ultimately wounded them both. He then reveals the profound misery his emotional exile these past 3 months has caused him. He describes the daily torture of their proximity, poisoned by the knowledge that he himself sabotaged their beginning. She grapples with the profound irony of his confession that his cruelty was a direct result of an overwhelming, unmanageable desire for her. He labels his behavior for what it was: cowardice. He chose fear over authenticity, a decision with nearly fatal consequences for her. This verbal admission is followed by an act of total surrender as he kneels, a powerful man completely undone, and begins to recount the day's events. The sound of gunshots served as a violent catalyst, clarifying his priorities in an instant. He vows to dismantle his entire empire, to annihilate the Centauros and all rivals, if it would guarantee her safety. He takes her hands, silencing her interruption to complete his declaration. He explicitly rejects the transactional roles he once assigned her, a strategic asset or a trophy wife. He wants her, the defiant, spirited woman who challenges him, who claims his space as her own, and who possesses a courage that he claims surpasses that of his own men. As tears stream down her face, she observes the profound dissonance between his words and his past actions. Acknowledging his failings and his lack of entitlement, he makes a simple, desperate plea for a chance to prove he is more than the cold-hearted man she was forced to marry. His plea for a chance at authenticity forces her to weigh 3 months of profound loneliness against contradictory evidence. Bruno's cryptic warning resurfaces, alongside the memory of his recent frantic terror and extreme protective measures following the attempt on her life. Recalling the adage to prioritize actions over words, she sees a flicker of hope in his gaze as she begins to set her terms. Her first condition is the dissolution of secrecy. His world must become hers, demanding full knowledge of the threats against them as his partner, not his possession. She demands involvement in major decisions and, as a final term, absolute, unfiltered honesty without protective omissions. He consents but adds his own condition, that she must offer him the same brutal truth. He tightens his grip, urging her to voice her needs and his failings. He asks with evident strain if forgiveness for their beginning is possible. She scrutinizes him for any hint of manipulation but finds only vulnerability. Realizing he has ceded all control to her, she quietly introduces another memory from their wedding day that he may have overlooked. In response to his confusion, she recalls Dario asking if he would merely perform a role on their wedding night. She reminds him of his terse reply that he would do his duty. The memory visibly pains him, but before he can speak, she reaches for his face, signaling a new insight. As her hand meets his face, she presents her analysis. His stoicism that night was a lie, told both to his men and to himself. She reveals that his touch was not cold or dutiful, but fraught with a painful, self-imposed restraint. His eyes open wide in a moment of shared recognition. His voice raw, he admits his fear was of losing control and revealing a desire she could weaponize against him. She dismisses the idea of leverage, closing the distance between them, Her only interest, she states, is in mutual truth, not in power plays. She then offers her own truth. For 3 months, she actively tried to hate him, mislabeling her loneliness as relief. She admits she was aware of his secret glances, a confession that surprises him. She saw it all, she confirms, meeting his gaze with newfound confidence. She lists the subtle acts of care she observed. Her favorite wine always stocked, her rooms perfectly climatized, a private opera box secured despite his professed dislike for it. He concedes his hatred for opera, but admits her happiness was a balm for his own silent suffering. In the charged space between them, she dictates the terms of their new union, an irreversible path with no emotional barriers. He accepts immediately, initiating a kiss that bears no resemblance to their first perfunctory exchange, signaling the start of their new reality. This kiss is a release of 3 months of repressed hunger and desperation. He holds her with a reverence reserved for priceless objects, while his movements convey a lifetime of deprivation. She mirrors his intensity, her hands anchoring him closer, fully reciprocating the unspoken need. He lifts her effortlessly, his embrace unyielding, the physical act cementing their reconciliation. Gasping for air, he confesses his feeling of unworthiness, yet vows a lifetime of effort to become the man she deserves. Her simple, earnest acceptance validates his promise. She acknowledges her own complexity, a statement he meets with a genuine smile, admitting his own. The word together is established as their new creed. With their personal conflict resolved, she immediately pivots to the external threat, and his entire demeanor shifts in response. The ruthless strategist resurfaces, vowing retaliation against those who threaten what is his. Yet he intertwines his fingers with hers, prioritizing their new intimacy. He promises to spend the night demonstrating the depth of his desire, a promise that elicits a visceral reaction from her. He extends his promise to all nights henceforth. The ensuing war with the Santoro family is swift and brutal, a 1-week storm of violence that reshapes the city's underworld. From the confines of a safe house, she follows the events on the news, a captivated observer of his world. His nightly returns, often bloodied and exhausted, reveal new facets of his character: the authoritative general, the brilliant strategist, and the ruthless protector. It is in this context of escalating violence and newfound intimacy that he reveals the devastating betrayal. Dario is the informant. On the 4th night, while she tends to his wounds, he discloses the treachery with a voice devoid of emotion. Dario's betrayal, he explains, was the source of the leak about her location. The familial connection makes the news sickening, and his mention of Bruno implies a final, unspoken resolution. She was discovering some truths were a burden best left unknown. "What of the Santoros?" she asked instead, returning her focus to his injury. "What should have been settled long ago?" His free hand gently cupped her face. "I intend to remove them from existence, utterly." The woman she used to be would have recoiled, but she had heard the gunfire. She had known the visceral dread of being the prey. She had witnessed the futility of mercy in their world. It only bred more conflict, more loss, and put her own people at greater risk. "Do what is necessary," she stated quietly. "Only return to me." His expression softened. Always. And he did. Each night he would sometimes rouse her with the softest of kisses. On other nights he would discover her awake, anticipating his return. Their unions were marked by a desperate urgency, born from the constant presence of danger and the new, fragile truth between them. In the quiet that followed, he would hold her, his heart beat a steadying rhythm, and confess things kept hidden from the world. About the father who forged him with brutality and withheld all affection. He spoke of his first kill at 17, an act that fundamentally altered his soul. He described the profound isolation of his position, a throne surrounded by subjects but devoid of trust. "Until you," he would murmur into her hair. "I trust you, Geneva." In turn, she revealed her own vulnerabilities, a mother who had surrendered, preferring narcotics to her own child. She spoke of her yearning for Florence, to witness the master's works firsthand. She confessed her fear of becoming just another beautiful, hollow fixture in the Mafia world. "You could never be hollow," he would state with certainty. "You possess far too much spirit." On the 7th day, Bruno arrived at the sanctuary bearing news. "It is done, boss," he said, his expression somber. "Antonio Santoro and his 2 sons are eliminated. Their remaining forces are scattered or have pledged allegiance." She studied Elio's features, searching for a trace of remorse. She saw only the cold finality of victory. "And Dario?" he inquired, also addressed. Bruno's gaze briefly met hers. "Should we?" Ginevra is aware. Elio's interruption was absolute. "She is aware of everything." A flicker of admiration crossed Bruno's weathered features. "In that case, Mrs. Vieira, your husband has neutralized an entire syndicate in under a week. The other families are unsettled. The Vieira name holds more power than ever." "But at what price?" she asked softly. 37 of their men are gone," Bruno reported. 12 of ours were wounded. 3 were killed. It could have been far worse. 3 of their own families were now in mourning. 3 women were now widows. A score of children would grow up without fathers. The sheer weight of that reality descended upon her. "I need to meet them," she declared abruptly. "The families of our men who fell." Both men simply stared, completely taken aback by her request. "That is not our way," Bruno offered, choosing his words with care. "The boss provides compensation and manages the services." "I wasn't asking about custom," she retorted. "I said I want to see them." Elio merely observed her, his expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because 3 men died to protect me, to protect us. The very least I can offer is to look their loved ones in the eye and express my gratitude." "It could be contentious," he countered. "Some may hold you responsible." "They would be right to." She met his gaze, unflinching. "I was the objective. They fell because the Centauros sought to wound you through me. I owe them a debt beyond money." A glimmer of profound pride ignited in Elio's eyes. "Then we will go together." The visits were emotionally devastating. Witnessing the raw anguish, the children too young to grasp their loss, the widows struggling to maintain their composure as their foundations crumbled. With each one, she held their hands, offered comfort, and promised their sacrifice would be honored. Elio remained beside her, a steadfast and silent support, and she perceived the shift in his men's regard for them. For her, it was no longer the deference owed to the boss's wife. It was true fealty to the woman who honored their fallen. "You were correct," Elio admitted after their final visit, about meeting them. "I know." She leaned against him, utterly spent, "but that doesn't lessen the horror." "Nothing of value is ever attained without cost." His arms enveloped her, drawing her close. "Come home with me, Ginevra. The threat is gone. We are safe. Home." For 3 months, the estate had been a gilded prison, but with Elio, perhaps it could be something more. On one condition, she stipulated: anything. No more separate domains, one room, one shared life, no more walls between us. He drew back, studying her with an expression of hope mingled with desire. "You mean The master suite? I mean, we build something new, she corrected. Not your territory or mine, ours. In that instant, he understood. The south wing, a sealed-off portion of the estate, dormant for years, possessing the most breathtaking views and complete seclusion. Then that is where our life will begin. She rose on her toes to accept his kiss. That night, the south wing of the Vieira estate became their universe. While the main house was cold modern marble, this space was a relic of a warmer past. Intricate crown molding, original wood floors, and a magnificent hearth in their future bedroom. My grandmother's wing, Elio explained as they traversed the shrouded rooms. She died when I was 12. My father sealed it, claiming the memories were too acute. She immediately understood. The space held an emotional warmth the rest of the mansion lacked. You could sense a woman's soul had been poured into this place, transforming it into a home, not a showroom. Tell me about her, she urged, tracing the ornate carvings of the mantel. She was the single point of softness in my father's world, Elio said softly, the only one who could draw a smile from him. After her passing, he grew colder and began molding me into the air he required. What would she have thought of me? The question that perpetually lingered in her thoughts escaped her lips. Elio's hand covered hers, solid and warm. She would have adored you. She always said I needed someone with the strength to defy me, yet the tenderness to recall my own humanity. I am not certain much tenderness remains in me. You are tender where it matters. His other hand came to rest over her heart. In here. For the next 2 weeks, they breathed new vitality into the south wing. Crews worked ceaselessly, blending modern systems with vintage character. She chose the furnishings. Elio oversaw the security. They debated paint swatches, settled on draperies, and found passion on dusty canvases during workers' breaks. It was profoundly normal, deeply domestic, and utterly foreign to their past experiences, and she savored every moment. The bed arrives tomorrow, Elio noted one evening, as they sat in their future bedroom, sharing wine like young lovers. It's about time. She rested against him, mellowed by the wine and completely at peace. I am finished with the guest quarters. I could always escort you to my former room, he proposed, his hand slipping beneath her shirt. Too great a distance, I whispered, settling onto his lap and feeling his immediate response. Besides, I prefer it here. It already feels like our space. Everything I possess is now ours, he breathed against my neck. The entire estate, the corporations, the whole dominion. I pulled back to meet his gaze. I have no desire for your dominion, Elio. I am aware, he said, and that is precisely why it is yours. His hands rested on my waist. Our children will inherit this. But should I be removed before then, it falls to you. Nothing will happen to you. You cannot guarantee that? His expression became grave. This life is inherently perilous. There will always be rivals for our position. I must know that if I fall, you will be secure, powerful enough that no one would dare to challenge you. The mere thought of his absence was a physical ache in my chest. Do not speak that way. I am a realist. He gently swept a strand of hair from my face. My attorney is preparing new documents. All my assets become joint property. You will have unrestricted access to all accounts, holdings, every enterprise. He then declared, Elio, this is not a negotiation. You are my wife, Geneva, my partner. It is time your authority reflected your standing. I was stunned. In their world, wives were ornamental assets, protected but powerless. Elio granting me tangible control and entry into his domain was unprecedented. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Do not thank me for what was always rightfully yours." He affirmed his words with a gentle kiss. We came together on the floor of our unfinished bedroom, surrounded by paint and dust, and it was sublime. Afterward, lying in his embrace under the moonlight, I felt an emotion I never anticipated in this union. Happiness. A happiness so potent it felt dangerous. "I am falling in love with you," I confessed into the quiet, the words emerging of their own accord. Elio became utterly still. Then his arms tightened around me like bands of steel and he pressed a kiss into my hair. "I fell for you the first moment I saw you," he admitted. He confessed the cowardice that had imprisoned his feelings, and at her urging, the words finally broke free. A raw and unvarnished declaration for Ginevra Vieira. His love was not for compliance, but for her defiance, that untamed fire which refused the mold their world demanded. He saw in her the catalyst for his own moral schism, a yearning for betterment at war with the core of his brutal identity. She turned, meeting his vulnerability by embracing his flawed nature as an essential truth of the man she loved. Their subsequent laughter was a rare, unguarded moment of sanctuary. Yet this scene is steeped in dramatic irony. They saw the end of their war with the Centauro crew as a final victory, but it was merely the prologue. In their world, happiness is a fragile truce, always destined to be broken by the next conflict. 2 months into their new life, a biological imperative asserted itself. "Ginevra?" Elio's voice carried from the bedroom, weighted with concern. "That's the 3rd morning this week." She rinsed her mouth, confronting a reflection in the mirror that told a story of pallor, fatigue, and a single formidable suspicion. The internal calendar was consulted. 6 weeks, possibly 7. "I'm fine," she called out, a statement undermined by the tremor in her hands on the marble. "Just something I ate?" Elio appeared at the doorway, his own day already begun. "You said that yesterday, and it remains true." His piercing gray eyes analyzed her. "You are a terrible liar, Amori." The endearment so recently adopted caused a constriction in her chest. Their life had just begun to settle, their sanctuary in the south wing a world unto itself, and now it felt threatened. Their days were a rhythm of shared meals and tangled limbs, of slow morning kisses. She would not permit this fragile peace to be shattered by a mere possibility. "I have a meeting with the charity board," she deflected. "The fundraiser next month is—" "Ginevra!" He crossed the room, tilting her face toward his. "What is wrong?" Bound by a promise of honesty, she delivered the unvarnished truth. "I think I might be pregnant." The words hung in the air, immense and gravitational. Elio's expression became a blank slate, his body rigid. The silence stretched, eroding her hope. This was too much, too soon for their 2-month-old bond. "Pregnant," he finally repeated in a whisper, his hand moving from her chin to her stomach. "Our baby," she ventured cautiously. "Maybe I need to take a test." His voice was rough with urgency. "Take one, now. Elio, please. Ginevra, I require certainty." A rare crack in his composure, a flash of vulnerability, secured her agreement. "Okay." Bruno was dispatched, returning within the hour with an array of tests, his face a mask of professional neutrality. She locked the bathroom door as Elio paced the bedroom like a predator in a cage. 3 tests from 3 different manufacturers were aligned on the counter. The wait was an agony of suspense. The result was a trinity of positives. Opening the door, she met Elio's gaze as he froze mid-stride. A single slow nod from her was all it took. "I'm pregnant." He closed the distance in an instant, lifting her into a spin. His laughter was an expression of pure, unrestrained joy she had never witnessed. "We're having a baby," he declared, setting her down with newfound reverence. "Thank God, Ginevra." Relief washed through her. "You are happy." "Happy?" he questioned, holding her face, his eyes shining. "I am terrified and ecstatic. But yes, amore, I am happy." For weeks, the knowledge was a secret they held between them. Elio's vigilance intensified, his protective instincts on high alert. Security details were doubled, then tripled. A nutritionist began supervising her meals, and Dr. Caesar, the family physician, commenced weekly house calls. "You are going to drive me to madness," she told him one night. "I am keeping you safe," he retorted. "Both of you." But the outside world began to intrude on their bubble. 3 weeks later, Bruno appeared, his expression grim. "We have a problem," he stated, placing a file on Ilio's desk. "Marcus Vitali is making moves." The name was familiar, a rival family head with unchecked ambition, a man whose wedding pleasantries had been transparently false. "What kind of moves?" Elio asked, his arm tightening around her. "He's been meeting with the other families, implying that you have gone soft." Bruno's gaze flickered to her apologetically. "That this marriage has rendered you weak." "Let me speculate," Elio said with arid disdain. "He is offering to provide Chicago with the strong leadership it requires." "Essentially," Bruno confirmed, producing photos. "He is also approaching your men, offering them better terms." She recognized some of the faces. Has anyone accepted his offer? Not as of yet. A shadow crossed Bruno's features. But he is relentless, and he is exploiting old divisions. He's targeting men who believe you have prioritized domesticity over business. The insult stung, even secondhand. Ilio's hand found hers. "They are mistaken," he said, his voice low. "Our operations have never been more profitable. Our territory is secure." "I am aware of that, boss, but Vitali is a master of misinformation." Bruno paused. "There is more." "Out with it." "He knows about the baby." A cold dread settled in her bones. "How?" "The source is unclear. It could be a mole or a leak from Dr. Caesar's office. He is spreading whispers about the Vieira bloodline, suggesting how convenient an accident would be before the child arrives." Elio's face became stone. "He threatened my wife and my child." "He is too cunning for direct threats," Bruno clarified. Yet the implication was undeniable. The man she loved was subsumed by the cold strategist who ruled the city. His expression was steel. He gave the order, his voice a lethal whisper. "Arrange a meeting. All family heads. Tomorrow. Inform Vitali. His attendance is mandatory." After Bruno left, Elio's hardened facade cracked for a moment as he embraced her. He made a vow. "He will not touch you. No one will ever harm you or our child." She clung to him, her own mind racing. Vitali was baiting him, hoping for an emotional, ill-conceived response. "When my family is threatened, there is no such thing as an overreaction." But she urged strategy over passion. "Do not give him the satisfaction. Show them this marriage made you a powerhouse, not a target." He stared, astonished. "How did you become so sharp?" "I married a kingpin," she replied. "I had to learn the playbook." The family council was summoned to a downtown penthouse, a neutral territory for such a meeting. Protocol dictated that she, a woman, should be absent. She refused. If I am the alleged source of your weakness, she argued, challenging patriarchal convention, then they must see that I am an asset, not a liability. Elio was torn between his instinct to shield her and the unassailable logic of her position. Fine, he conceded. You will remain by my side, but let me handle Vitali. Of course, she murmured. I am merely here to look intimidating. His laugh was tense. In that dress, you will be far more than intimidating. Her attire was a calculated maneuver, a severe black dress that radiated wealth. Her grandmother's rubies, her hair was styled with flawless precision. She was the image of a Mafia queen, serene and untouchable as they entered the room where the other bosses waited. 5 men, all predators, whose eyes performed an instant analysis as they entered. Marcus Vitali was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps mid-40s, with a handsome, practiced smile. He rose as they approached, extending his hand toward Elio in a hollow gesture of respect. Vieira, it is good you called this meeting, and Mrs. Vieira, his gaze was a blatant appraisal. You are glowing. Marriage agrees with me, she replied, her voice like ice, as her hand rested pointedly over her stomach. It was a power play, a public claim. She saw the calculation flicker in Vitali's eyes, quickly followed by dismissal. He had misjudged her as a vulnerability. The man was a fool. Elio led her to the head of the table, placing her at his right hand. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. I understand there has been some discussion regarding the state of my affairs. I felt it was time we addressed it. I have no concerns, Giovanni Russo, the eldest, stated. Your profits are their own testament. Leo Carbone agreed. Vitali offered a thin smile. The finances are indeed robust. Elio has always had a mind for numbers. My concern, however, is more philosophical. Elio's voice dropped to a menacing register. Please enlighten us. Our world requires a particular kind of man, Vitali began, ruthless, singularly focused. His gaze drifted to her. One might fear that such domestic comfort could dull that essential edge. One might, Elio agreed, his voice dangerously calm. Are you concerned, Marcus? The use of his first name was a deliberate slight. Vitali's jaw clenched. My concern is for our collective security, he said smoothly. When one family weakens, we are all at risk. A chilling laugh escaped Elio. Allow me to tell you what I see in my marriage, Marcus. I see a partner who has sharpened my strategy and honed my focus. I see a woman who understands this world on an instinctual level. I see the mother of my heir who will inherit an empire that will dwarf my own. He stood, his presence commanding the entire room. You wish to speak of weakness? Let us speak of yours. Your position has been eroding for a year. Your men are disloyal because you lead with fear. You are so desperate that you target my pregnant wife with veiled threats. Vitali's face flushed crimson. I never. You did. Model. Elio's words cut through the objection with surgical precision, stating a fact known to everyone at the table. The only variable remaining was the nature of his response. A profound quiet descended, the atmosphere so heavy it felt palpable. Each man remained frozen, awaiting the inevitable judgment. You are presented with 2 paths, Marcus, Elio declared. You may beg my wife for forgiveness, swear fealty to the Vieira family, and cede a significant portion of your territory as penance, or you may decline, and we will resolve this in the traditional manner. A gauntlet had been thrown. Vitali's gaze darted across the assembly, searching for an ally. He found only impassive expressions. Any support he once had vanished. Aligning with Elio was now the only path to survival. No disrespect was intended toward Mrs. Vieira, he finally managed, the words a clear sacrifice of his pride, nor to your heir. Yet it was a declaration devoid of genuine apology. Vitali's hands tightened into fists upon the table. I regret that my words were misconstrued. This was a marginal improvement. Elio resumed his seat, his hand finding hers beneath the table. Bruno will contact you tomorrow to arrange the territorial transfer. This meeting is adjourned. Yet she should have recognized the deceptive simplicity. She should have understood that a man like Marcus Vitali would never quietly accept such a public defeat. 2 weeks after the confrontation, her 6-month pregnancy had become undeniable. Elio's protective instincts intensified, compelling him to keep her constantly near. But a charity gala, an event she had spent months organizing, awaited, and she would not allow fear to make her a recluse. I will be accompanied by 10 guards, she assured him that morning. Bruno himself will be driving. It is a museum, Elio, not a battlefield. Every place is a battlefield, he countered, his voice grim as his fingers adjusted her necklace. But you are correct. I cannot hold you captive. You could attempt it, she teased, rising on her toes to kiss him. But I would make your existence unbearable. You already do, my love. A slight smile touched his lips. Inform me of your arrival, your departure, and every hour between. The gala was a masterpiece of opulence, the museum transformed by flora and ambient light. She moved among Chicago's elite, many of whom had finally come to acknowledge her place as Elio's wife. She discussed art and philanthropy, while her security detail maintained a silent, unseen cordon. She was engrossed in a discussion about a new scholarship when Bruno materialized, his face ashen. Mrs. Vieira, we must depart immediately. The stark terror in his voice sent an icy current through her. What has happened? The dawn. There has been an incident. Her entire reality seemed to shift and fracture. What sort of incident? Not here. Bruno's hand was on her arm, steering her toward the exit. I will provide details in the vehicle. The journey back to their estate became the most excruciating of her life. Bruno's debrief was terse and professional, yet his words conjured a scene of absolute horror. Vitali had not capitulated. He had orchestrated a far grander scheme, a move to eliminate Elio and usurp the Vieira organization. He had fabricated a meeting concerning the land transfer, only to spring an ambush on Elio with over a dozen assassins. How severe are his injuries? She whispered, her arms protectively cradling her stomach. He is alive, Bruno stated, a response that offered no real comfort. Dr. Caesar is attending to him. The residence was a portrait of managed chaos. Guards were posted everywhere. The staff moved with pale, frightened expressions. She hurried through the corridors as swiftly as her condition allowed, drawn toward tense voices emanating from their bedroom. Elio lay upon their bed, his shirt sheared away as Dr. Caesar worked urgently on a wound in his shoulder. The volume of blood was shocking, saturating the linens and staining the doctor's hands. Elio! His name escaped her as a fractured sob. His eyelids fluttered open, his gaze finding hers. Jane, you should be at the gala, and you should not be wounded, she replied, moving swiftly to his side. Her hands shook as she took his, feeling the slick warmth of his blood. Who was it? Vitali. He hissed the name as if it were a poison. The coward brought 12 men. I had only 4. And his current location? She demanded, looking to Bruno. He has disappeared, Bruno replied, his tone grave. But the hunt has already begun. Dr. Caesar glanced up. Mrs. Vieira, I require space to work. I will not leave him. Geneva. Elio attempted to sit, but a sharp wince stopped him. The child is unharmed, she interjected. But you are not. What is the prognosis, doctor? The bullet passed through cleanly, Dr. Caesar said, returning to his patient. It missed all major arteries. He will require rest and antibiotics, but he will recover. The wave of relief that came over her left her unsteady. Thank Providence. Not Providence, Elio amended, his voice strained yet firm. Bruno, he drove with infernal speed to bring me here. Over the subsequent hours, the complete narrative emerged. Vitali's trap was meticulously planned, but he had misjudged both Elio's resolve and Bruno's capability. They had battled their way to safety, though Elio sustained a bullet wound in the fight. Vitali had become a phantom, along with his entire inner circle. Every known contact, safe house, and business front had been deserted. He has vanished into thin air, Bruno reported that evening as Elio slept under the influence of medication. But there is no escape. The message is out. Every family, every associate understands that Marcus Vitali is a man marked for death. She maintained a vigil at Elio's bedside, clutching his hand, monitoring his breathing. The fear she felt upon seeing him so grievously injured had transmuted into a colder, harder emotion. I want to participate in finding him, she stated, her voice quiet. Bruno's gaze was sharp. Mrs. Vieira, I cannot permit that monster to remain at large while he plots another assault. She met his gaze without flinching. With Elio incapacitated, leadership falls to another. He began to protest, citing her pregnancy. She countered that she was also the Don's wife, which placed her in command. She moved to the window and issued a directive. Assemble the lieutenants for a meeting the next morning. It was time for these men to discover the true nature of the woman their boss had married. She could perceive the doubt in Bruno's expression, yet there was also a nascent respect. He agreed to arrange the meeting. The following day, 10 of Elio's chief operatives were gathered. The skepticism was a palpable force when she entered. This pregnant woman, assuming she could command them. Gentlemen, she began, assuming Elio's position at the head of the table. You are all aware my husband is recovering from an attack. Until he is capable, I am directing the campaign against Marcus Vitali. A man, likely Tony, began, with all deference, Mrs. Vieira, this is a matter for men. This is a matter for the family, she interrupted him, and I am this family. Now, Bruno, present the intelligence on Vitali's whereabouts. For the next hour, she dissected every available piece of data. His network, his finances, his habits. She relentlessly posed questions, searching for a vulnerability. She could witness their skepticism transform into reluctant admiration. He has a sister, she articulated aloud. Unmarried, resides alone in Lincoln Park. Has he made contact? Bruno confirmed her residence was under surveillance, but there had been no activity. He wouldn't appear personally, she reasoned. The risk is too great. But he would transmit a message via a courier, someone his sister would trust. She turned to Tony. You were raised in that area. Who does she depend on? His eyes widened. Her priest, Father Donovan at St. Mary's. Deploy a team to that church, she commanded. Ensure they are discreet. If any message is relayed through that priest, we will intercept it. Bruno nodded, visibly impressed. A sound strategy, and she was proven correct. 2 days later, their team observed Vitali's sister receiving a call at the church, then departing abruptly with luggage. They tracked her to a remote cabin 2 hours north of the city, where, inside, they discovered Marcus Vitali hiding like the coward he was. Elio was still convalescing when Bruno's team returned with a bound and beaten Vitali. She was in the study reviewing security protocols when they entered. "Mrs. Vieira," Bruno announced. "He is secured. What are your instructions?" She recognized this as a test of her resolve. They needed to know if she possessed the fortitude for the next step. She looked at Vitali, the man who had attempted to murder her husband, an unborn child. She experienced only cold, dispassionate logic. "Take him to the wine cellar," she said evenly. "Confine him. I will inform my husband that he has a guest." Elio was sitting up in bed when she entered their room. His condition had improved, though his movements were still cautious. "You have been occupied," he observed, gesturing to the documents on the bed. "Someone had to be." She sat beside him. "We have Vitali." His gaze sharpened with focus. "Where?" She recounted everything, her assumption of control over the family. She detailed how she had deduced Vitali's location and how his men now regarded her with respect instead of condescension. "You accomplished this," he said, a note of pure astonishment in his voice. "You located him. You led my men. You, Geneva, were utterly formidable." "I was frightened," she confessed, "but I was also enraged. He tried to take you from me and from our child. I could not permit that." Elio touched her cheek, his face filled with reverence. "What is your wish for him?" She understood the choice was hers. Her husband was granting her the power to determine Marcus Vitali's fate. "I want you to manage it," she replied, "but I will be present. I want him to witness that the woman he dismissed, the weakness he sought to exploit, was ultimately his undoing." Pride illuminated Elio's eyes. "Tomorrow evening, when my strength has returned." That night in the darkness, Elio's hand rested on her belly. She felt their baby kick for the very first time. The movements were powerful, determined, and they both laughed with surprise. "She is a fighter," Elio whispered, "like her mother." "Or he is," she retorted. "A reflection of his father. Our child would inherit a legacy of strength." A kiss in the dark sealed this vow of love and lineage. The next evening, this paradox was laid bare before a kneeling Marcus Vitali. Elio's voice was a quiet blade. "You saw my wife as a vulnerability," he said. "You were wrong. She is my fortress, Vitali. She is my purpose, my reason to construct instead of merely demolish." Vitali's retort was contemptuous. "She's just some woman." "No." She stepped forward, her hand a shield over her womb. "I am the woman who engineered your demise, who commanded the soldiers you presumed would betray me, and who carries the future of the Vieira dynasty." Her gaze met Elio's. "My purpose here is fulfilled. Proceed as you must." They departed the cellar together, his hand a steady presence at her back, leaving Bruno to conclude the grim task. The visceral details were unnecessary. All that mattered was the nullification of the threat and the sanctity of her family. 3 months later, on a frigid December night, the crucible of labor began. Elio, a man forged in conflict, was unnerved, his composure fractured in a way no firefight ever could. "You're magnificent, amore," he soothed, his words a mask for his own fear. "So powerful," her reply was a breathless retort, a simple sentiment from a spectator. "You are not the one enduring this." Agony consumed her words as she obeyed Dr. Caesar's rhythm. Push. Breathe. Again. Then a rupture in the silence. A cry, both furious and perfect. "It is a girl," Dr. Caesar announced, placing their daughter on her chest. She was a flawless echo of Elio, with hair like midnight. When her eyes opened, they held the same intense, slate-gray depth as her father's. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a cry that spoke of an inherited, top-tier vitality. "Hello, my little one," she whispered through tears. "We have awaited you." Elio's touch was reverent on their daughter's head, his own eyes luminous. "She is without fault." "You're both without fault. What shall we name her?" she asked, looking to him. "Elena," he answered instantly, "for my grandmother who taught me that strength and compassion can coexist." "Elena Vieira," she murmured, testing the name. As if in silent assent, their daughter quieted, regarding them with those solemn gray eyes. "She is already taking our measure," she said, a laugh catching in her tears. "A perceptive child," Elia whispered, kissing her, "like her mother." Later, with Elena sleeping in her arms, she contemplated the chaotic trajectory that had delivered them to this profound stillness. She traced the narrative arc, the disrespect preceding their union, the violence that forged their bond, the war with Vitali that tested their resolve. And now, Elena, the living proof of their shared creation. "Do you recall your words on our wedding day?" she asked softly. "That I was nothing more than a strategic alliance?" His arm tightened around her. "My greatest falsehood and my deepest remorse." "Mine as well," she admitted, "because I believed the fiction." She had accepted her role as an obligation devoid of intrinsic worth. And now his voice was quiet. She looked from their child to her husband. "Now the truth is clear. Your distance wasn't rejection. It was a defense against wanting me too much. I terrified you." "You still do," he confessed. "This power you hold, the things I would do for your safety. It is a fearsome thing." "Good," she replied, kissing him. "Because you terrify me too." This life exceeded all imagination. Elena stirred, and they watched her in awe. "She rescued us," Elio murmured. "Or perhaps you did, by giving me a reason to be better." "We rescued each other," she corrected him. "That is the purpose of family." In that moment of clarity, holding her daughter, she realized she had spent her life planning an escape from the world she now commanded. She had always equated freedom with escape, a flight from the chaos. The great irony was discovering that true autonomy lay in finding one's place inside the storm, with a person who saw her power not as a threat to be dimmed, but as a fire to be fueled. He loved her for her fire. She once believed she was married to a monster, but she came to understand that monsters are often just men who were never given a catalyst for their own humanity. As it turned out, she had become Elio's reason to be human, just as he, in turn, had become hers.